The shotgun leveled at Zelda Coleman's chest did not shake, though the hand holding it belonged to a woman who had been her neighbor for 3 years. And Zelda understood in that frozen moment that her carefully constructed life was about to shatter like glass under a hammer. It was June of 1873, and Fort Garland, Colorado, had been her refuge since the war ended. A place where nobody asked too many questions about a young woman who arrived alone with haunted eyes and enough money to buy the small seamstress shop on the eastern edge of town. The mountains rose sharp and protective around the settlement, and Zelda had believed she could disappear into their shadows, could stitch herself a new existence one careful seam at a time. But Martha Jenkins stood in the doorway of the shop now, her face twisted with something beyond rage, beyond reason, and Zelda felt the old fear crawling up her spine like it had never left. "You think I do not know?" Martha's voice cracked like breaking ice. "You think I have not seen the way he looks at you? The way you smile at him when you think nobody is watching?" Zelda raised her hands slowly, the needle she had been holding falling to the floor with a tiny metallic sound that seemed impossibly loud. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice came out steady, practiced in the art of calming dangerous situations. "Martha, I have never done anything inappropriate with your husband. I promise you, on everything I hold sacred." "Lies." The shotgun jerked upward, and Zelda flinched despite herself. "He came home smelling of rose water, your rose water, the same scent you wear every day like some kind of spell." The accusation was absurd. Zelda had never been closer to Harold Jenkins than the width of her shop counter when he came to collect the shirts she mended for him. But she recognized the wild desperation in Martha's eyes, had seen it before in a different face, a different time, and knew that logic held no power here. This was about pain that had nothing to do with Zelda, about wounds that festered in the dark places of a marriage she knew nothing about. "Put the gun down." The voice came from behind Martha, deep and calm, and carrying the kind of authority that made people listen without thinking. "Nobody needs to die over a misunderstanding." Martha spun, and Zelda saw him for the first time, standing in the doorway with his hands visible and empty, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing a face that seemed carved from the same stone as the mountains themselves. He wore the dust of the trail on his clothes, and a marshal's badge caught the afternoon light on his chest. "This is not your concern, Travis Brennan," Martha said, but some of the fire had left her voice. "When someone points a weapon at another person in my jurisdiction, it becomes my concern." He took a careful step forward, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "I know you are hurting, Martha. I know Harold has given you cause to doubt him, but Miss Coleman is not the reason for your troubles, and you know that in your heart." Zelda watched the exchange with her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. She had seen the marshal around town, had served him coffee at the social gatherings she forced herself to attend, but they had never spoken more than polite pleasantries. He was younger than she expected for someone who wore the badge, maybe 28 or 29, with dark hair that curled slightly over his collar and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. "He does not come home anymore," Martha whispered, and the shotgun began to lower. "He goes to the saloon, or he goes riding, or he just disappears. And I am alone in that house with nothing but my thoughts, and they tell me such terrible things." Travis moved closer, his hand extending slowly toward the weapon. "Then we need to talk about Harold, not terrorize innocent women." "Give me the gun, Martha. Let me help you find a real solution." The moment stretched like taffy, and then Martha's shoulders collapsed inward and she released the shotgun into Travis's capable hands. She began to sob, deep, wrenching sounds that spoke of months or years of accumulated misery, and Travis handed the weapon to Zelda with a significant look before guiding Martha toward the door. "Take her to Dr. Morrison," he said over his shoulder. "Tell him she needs something to help her rest, and that I will be by later to discuss arrangements." But he paused, turning back to look at Zelda with those searching eyes, and she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the gun that had just been pointed at her. "Are you all right, Miss Coleman?" she nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched him lead Martha away into the afternoon sunlight that suddenly seemed too bright, too revealing. Her hands began to shake only after they were gone, the tremors starting in her fingers and working their way up her arms until her whole body shuddered with the release of terror she had not allowed herself to feel while in danger. The shotgun leaned against her cutting table like an accusation, and Zelda sank onto her stool and pressed her face into her hands and tried not to remember another gun, another time, another moment when everything safe had turned dangerous without warning. She was still sitting there when Travis returned an hour later, his knock gentle against the doorframe even though the door stood open. "Miss Coleman, may I come in?" Zelda straightened, smoothing her skirts and tucking loose strands of blonde hair back into the neat bun at the nape of her neck. "Of course, Marshal Brennan." He removed his hat as he entered, holding it in both hands like a shield or an offering. "I wanted to make sure you were truly all right. That kind of experience can shake a person more than they realize in the moment." "I am fine." The lie came automatically, smooth as silk thread. Travis studied her for a long moment, and Zelda had the uncomfortable sensation that he could see straight through her carefully maintained composure to the trembling girl underneath. "You handled yourself well." Kept calm, did not make any sudden movements, spoke to her with respect instead of anger. Most people would have panicked. "Practice," Zelda said, and then wished she could snatch the word back from the air between them. His eyes sharpened, but his voice remained gentle. "What kind of practice requires a woman to learn how to talk down someone with a weapon? The kind I would rather not discuss with a stranger, Marshal." She stood, busying herself with tidying the bolts of fabric on her shelves, anything to avoid that penetrating gaze. "Thank you for your intervention. I am grateful you were passing by at the right moment." "I was not passing by." He set his hat on her counter, the gesture somehow significant. "Martha's sister came to find me, said Martha had been talking wild all morning and had taken Harold's shotgun from the cabinet. I came as fast as I could." Zelda turned to face him, startled by the admission. "Then you risked yourself deliberately." "You could not have known whether she would shoot you instead. Part of the job." He smiled, and it transformed his stern features into something warm and approachable. "Besides, I am harder to kill than I look." Despite everything, Zelda felt an answering smile tug at her lips. "You look fairly difficult to kill already, Marshal." "Travis," he said. "If we are going to know each other, we should use given names. We are not going to know each other." The words came out sharper than intended, defensive walls slamming into place. "I appreciate your help today, truly, but I prefer to keep to myself." Something flickered across his face, understanding mixed with curiosity, but he did not push. Instead, he collected his hat and moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "The offer stands regardless, Miss Coleman. If you need anything, or if Martha troubles you again, my office is just down the street." She watched him walk away, his stride long and confident, and felt an unfamiliar twist of regret beneath her ribs. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with genuine concern, had offered help without expecting something in return, and some buried part of her yearned to call him back, to take the hand he had metaphorically extended. But Zelda had learned through fire and blood that trusting people led only to pain, and she returned to her sewing with determined focus, pushing all thoughts of concerned marshals and penetrating gazes from her mind. The summer heat settled over Fort Garland like a wool blanket, and Zelda maintained her careful routine. She opened her shop at 7 each morning, worked until the light began to fail, took her meals alone in the small rooms behind the shop, and attended church on Sundays because absence would be noticed and remarked upon. She spoke pleasantly to customers, completed her work with meticulous care, and kept every relationship at a safe, polite distance. But Travis Brennan had a way of appearing in her orbit with increasing frequency. He stopped by to report that Martha Jenkins had been sent to stay with family in Denver, that Harold had been given a stern talking to about his responsibilities, that Zelda need not fear any repercussions from the incident. He purchased new shirts and brought his mending, though Zelda suspected his clothes needed no more repair than any other man's in town. He appeared at church socials and town gatherings, and somehow always ended up in conversations near where she stood. He did not push, did not demand her attention or her confidence, but his presence became a steady constant in her peripheral vision, and Zelda found herself looking for him despite her better judgment. It was late July when everything shifted. Zelda had stayed late in her shop, working by lamplight to finish a wedding dress for the mayor's daughter, her eyes straining over the delicate beadwork she had promised to complete. The knock at her door startled her so badly she stabbed herself with her needle, drawing a bright bead of blood from her fingertip. "Miss Coleman," Travis's voice carried through the wood, concerned. "I saw your light still burning. Is everything all right?" She opened the door, sucking on her injured finger, and found him standing in the darkness with a basket in his hands and worry creasing his forehead. "I am working, Marshal. Is there a problem? Just Travis, please." He held up the basket. "And no problem except that it is past 9 o'clock, and I would wager you have not eaten since noon. My landlady made far too much stew and cornbread, and I thought you might appreciate some." The smell hit her then, rich and savory, and her stomach growled audibly in response. She had skipped lunch, too focused on her work, and breakfast had been only coffee and stale bread. "That is kind, but unnecessary. Humor me." He stepped past her into the shop, setting the basket on her counter and beginning to unpack it without waiting for permission. "You cannot work yourself into exhaustion. The dress will still be there tomorrow. The wedding is in 3 days." But Zelda closed the door and found herself drawn to the counter by the promise of hot food, and if she was honest, by the presence of another human being in her lonely space. "I cannot afford to fall behind." Travis laid out 2 plates, 2 forks, a container of stew and another of cornbread, moving with the efficiency of someone accustomed to taking care of himself. "You also cannot afford to collapse from hunger. Come, sit. Take a break for 20 minutes. The beadwork will be easier with a clear head and a full stomach." She should have sent him away, should have maintained her carefully constructed boundaries, but the smell of home-cooked food and the genuine concern in his eyes wore down her resistance. Zelda sat on one of her shop stools, accepted the plate he handed her, and took her first bite of something she had not prepared herself in longer than she could remember. "This is wonderful," she said, and heard the surprise in her own voice. Travis settled on the stool across from her, balancing his plate on his knee. "Mrs. Henderson is a treasure. I am lucky she took pity on me when I first arrived in town and offered me her spare room." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Zelda felt some of the constant tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables, the cornbread sweet and crumbly, and having someone else in the space made the shadows seem less oppressive. "How long have you been in Fort Garland?" Travis asked eventually, his tone casual but his attention focused. 3 years. Zelda broke off another piece of cornbread. I bought the shop from Mrs. Patterson when her arthritis got too bad for her to continue. And before that. The question hung in the air between them, innocent on its surface but weighted with all the things Zelda never discussed. She set down her fork, her appetite suddenly vanished. Before that does not matter. It matters if it is still hurting you. Travis leaned forward, his dark eyes serious. I have been a lawman for 6 years, Miss Coleman. I have learned to read people, to see what they try to hide. And you hide pain like most people hide valuables. Zelda stood abruptly, moving to the window where she could look out at the empty street rather than meet his gaze. You overstep, Marshal. Perhaps. She heard him rise, heard his boots against her wooden floor as he approached. But I watched you when Martha had that gun on you. You were afraid but not surprised, like you have had weapons pointed at you before. And I have seen the way you flinch when men raise their voices, the way you always position yourself near exits, the way you never quite relax even in supposedly safe situations. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. Stop. Why? His voice came from right behind her now, close but not touching. Why do you insist on carrying this alone? Whatever happened to you, whatever put that look in your eyes, it is eating you alive from the inside. You know nothing about me. The words came out harsh, defensive. I know you are strong. I know you are kind to people even when you clearly want to keep them at arm's length. I know you do beautiful work and you never miss church and you have not smiled, really smiled, once in all the times I have seen you. He paused and she could feel the warmth of him at her back, solid and steady. I know something terrible happened to you and I know you think you have to face it alone, but you do not, Zelda, not if you do not want to. Hearing her given name from his lips broke something inside her chest, some last barrier she had been maintaining through sheer force of will. She turned to face him and found him closer than she expected, found herself looking up into eyes that held nothing but genuine care and concern. My father, she heard herself say, the words dragged up from some deep well inside her, was a drunk and a mean one. My mother died when I was 14, and after that there was nobody to stop him when he got angry. He never hit my face, never anywhere that would show, always careful about that. Said it was discipline, said I was ungrateful and needed to learn my place. Travis's jaw clenched, but he did not interrupt, just listened with his whole attention focused on her. I endured it for years because I had nowhere else to go. But then he started looking at me differently, started saying things about how I was nearly grown, how I could help him in other ways. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the summer heat. I knew what he meant. I knew what was coming. So I stole the household money he kept in a jar, and I ran. How old were you? Travis's voice was rough with barely suppressed anger. 18. Old enough to travel alone without arousing too much suspicion, young enough that I was terrified every moment. The memories flooded back, sharp and vivid. I made it to Kansas City, got work in a factory for a while, but I was always afraid he would find me, always looking over my shoulder. When I heard about opportunities out west, I saved everything I could and came here, started over, became someone new. And you have been hiding ever since. It was not a question. Zelda nodded, suddenly exhausted. I am good at hiding, good at being invisible. It is safer that way. Travis reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements, and took one of her hands in both of his. His palms were warm and calloused, his grip gentle but firm. You should not have to be invisible, Zelda. You should not have to hide your light because some bastard made you afraid to shine. You do not understand. But she did not pull her hand away. The world is not safe for women like me. Women without protection, without family, without money. I learned to make myself small, to not draw attention, because attention is dangerous. The world is not safe, Travis agreed. But you do not have to face it alone, and you do not have to let what he did define the rest of your life. Tears pricked at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself in years. I do not know how to be any other way. Then learn. He squeezed her hand. Let people in, Zelda. Let me in. I am not going to hurt you. I am not going anywhere. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the sincerity she saw in his face, but the fear was a living thing inside her chest. You do not know me well enough to make promises like that. Then let me get to know you. He smiled, tentative but warm. Let me take you to the church social next week. Let me show you that not all men are like your father, that some of us can be trusted. Zelda looked at their joined hands, at the way his completely encompassed hers, and felt something shift inside her chest. Terror and hope warred together, and for the first time in years, hope was winning. One social, she said finally, but if you prove untrustworthy, I will not give you another chance. Fair enough. His smile widened into something radiant. I will take what you are willing to give and prove myself worthy of more. The church social was torture of an entirely different sort than Zelda had anticipated. True to his word, Travis arrived at her shop at the appointed time, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt that she recognized as one she had mended for him weeks earlier. He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and Zelda took it with trembling fingers, hyper-aware of every eye that tracked their progress through town. The social was held in the church garden, long tables laden with food and drink, children running between the adults with shrieking laughter, and the whole town seemingly in attendance. Zelda had been to dozens of these gatherings, always hovering at the edges, speaking when spoken to but never volunteering conversation, leaving early with excuses about work waiting. But Travis kept her anchored in the center of things, introducing her to people she had seen but never truly met, drawing her into conversations with such natural ease that she found herself responding before she could think to be afraid. He noticed when she grew tense and redirected attention away from her, noticed when she seemed uncomfortable and found reasons to move them to different groups, noticed everything about her with an attention that should have felt intrusive, but instead felt protective. "You are good at this," she told him during a quiet moment, watching him interact with a group of ranchers discussing water rights. "At what?" He handed her a cup of lemonade, his fingers brushing hers in a way that sent unexpected warmth up her arm, reading people, knowing what they need, making them feel safe. She took a sip of the tart, sweet drink. "It is a gift," Travis shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by the observation. "My mother always said I was born noticing things, could not help but see when people were hurting or hiding. Drove my siblings crazy because I always knew when they were lying." "How many siblings?" "4. 2 brothers, 2 sisters. I am the middle child, which my mother claimed explained my need to mediate everyone else's problems." His expression softened with affection. "They are all back in Missouri on the family farm. I send money when I can, visit when duty allows." Zelda felt a pang of something like envy for that obvious love, that intact family. "They must miss you." "They do. But they understand that I needed to find my own path, make my own mark on the world." He looked at her intently. "What about you? Do you have anyone besides your father?" She shook her head. "I was an only child. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father, said he was beneath them. After she died, I was alone. Not anymore." Travis said it with such quiet certainty that Zelda felt tears prick her eyes again. "You have me now if you want me." Before she could respond, the mayor's wife called everyone to attention for the announcement of some town business, and the moment passed. But Zelda carried those words with her through the rest of the evening, turned them over in her mind like precious stones. examined them for flaws, and found only sincerity. When Travis walked her home that night, the moon riding high and bright overhead, he did not try to kiss her but simply squeezed her hand and promised to see her tomorrow. Zelda let herself into her shop with fingers that shook for entirely different reasons than usual, and realized with something like shock that she was happy. The summer rolled toward autumn, and Zelda found herself opening like a flower toward the sun. Travis became a fixture in her days, stopping by with coffee in the mornings, sharing meals when his duties allowed, taking her on walks through the foothills when she needed to escape the confines of her shop. He courted her with a patience and respect that gradually wore away her defenses, proved through consistent action that his word was good, that he could be trusted. She learned that he had become a lawman because his father had been killed in a robbery when Travis was 16, and he had vowed to protect others from similar violence. She learned that he loved books and could recite poetry, that he had a scar on his shoulder from a bullet he took defending a homesteader's family, that he sang off-key when he thought nobody was listening, and it was the most endearing thing she had ever heard. And Travis learned her in return, with the same careful attention he brought to everything. He learned that she loved wildflowers more than cultivated roses, that thunder made her anxious because her father had often come home drunk during storms, that she had taught herself to read from her mother's Bible, and had a hunger for learning she had never been able to satisfy. He brought her books from his own collection, watched her face light up when she opened new volumes, listened to her opinions and ideas with genuine interest. "You are brilliant," he told her one September evening as they sat on the bench behind her shop, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "You should have had the chance to go to university, to study and grow and become whatever you wanted to be." Zelda leaned her head against his shoulder, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "I am content with what I have. Are you?" He turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching. "Or have you just convinced yourself that wanting more is dangerous?" She considered the question seriously, as she had learned to consider everything Travis said. "Perhaps both. I spent so long just surviving that I forgot about living, but you are teaching me the difference. Good." He brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch gentle. "Because you deserve everything good this world has to offer, Zelda Coleman, and I intend to spend as long as you will let me proving that to you." Her breath caught at the promise implicit in those words, at the future they suggested. "Travis, I need to tell you something. Anything." "I am afraid." The admission cost her, but she forced it out. "I am afraid that this is too good to be true, that I will wake up one day and it will all be gone. I am afraid that you will realize I am too damaged, too broken, too much work. I am afraid that I will disappoint you." Travis took her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me carefully. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are a woman who survived terrible things and built a life for herself despite them. That does not make you damaged. That makes you strong." "But what if—" "No." He cut her off firmly. "No what ifs. I see you, Zelda. I see all of you, the parts you show the world and the parts you hide. I see your strength and your fear and your courage and your pain. And I choose you. Every single part of you. I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to go." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Years of accumulated fear and loneliness pouring out of her in great heaving sobs. Travis pulled her against his chest and held her while she cried, his hand moving in soothing circles on her back, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. He did not try to quiet her or tell her everything would be fine, just held her and let her purge the poison that had been building inside her for so long. When the storm finally passed, Zelda felt wrung out but lighter, as if something heavy she had been carrying had been set down at last. She pulled back to look at Travis through swollen eyes and found him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her chest ache. "I am a mess," she said, trying for levity. "You are beautiful." He wiped her tears away with his thumbs. "And I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and terrifying and exactly what she needed to hear. Zelda searched his face for any sign of doubt or insincerity, and found none, only that steady, honest certainty that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "I think," she said slowly, testing the words on her tongue, "I am falling in love with you too." Travis's smile could have lit the entire territory. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was sweet and chaste and held the promise of everything they could become together. When they finally pulled apart, the stars had begun to emerge overhead, and Zelda felt like she could see them clearly for the first time in years. The shadows that had haunted her did not disappear, but they no longer seemed quite so overwhelming with Travis beside her. The winter came early to Fort Garland that year, snow falling in thick white curtains that transformed the town into something from a fairy tale. Travis proposed on Christmas Eve, in front of the tree the town had erected in the church, going down on one knee in front of half the settlement and offering her a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. "Marry me," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Let me spend the rest of my life showing you what love should look like. Let me be the family you never had, the protection you should have always known. Let me wake up beside you every morning and thank God for the gift of your presence in this world." Zelda looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the gathered crowd holding its collective breath, and felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. "Yes," she said, and then louder, "Yes, Travis Brennan, I will marry you." The church erupted in cheers and applause, but Zelda only had eyes for Travis as he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to sweep her into his arms and kiss her thoroughly enough to make the older lady's tusk and the younger one's sigh. She kissed him back with all the love and hope and joy she had kept locked away for so long, and felt truly free for the first time in her life. They were married in early spring, when the wildflowers began to blanket the meadows in riots of color. Zelda wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and carried a bouquet of the mountain wildflowers Travis had brought her that first morning they woke up engaged. She walked down the aisle alone because she had no father to give her away and wanted none, and met Travis at the altar with tears of joy streaming down her face. "I love you," she whispered as they joined hands, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I love you," he responded, his voice thick with emotion. "Today and all my tomorrows." The preacher declared them husband and wife, and Travis kissed her with such tenderness that Zelda felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it. The town celebrated with them, throwing rice and cheering, but Zelda barely noticed anything beyond the man holding her hand, and the future suddenly spread before them like an unmarked map. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, 3 rooms and a porch with a view of the mountains, and Zelda set about making it a home with the same careful attention she brought to her sewing. She hung curtains and planted a garden and learned to cook the foods Travis loved, and every evening when he came home from his rounds, she met him at the door with a kiss, and the knowledge that this was real, this was hers, this was forever. The marriage was not without its challenges. Zelda still had nightmares sometimes, waking in a cold sweat with the phantom feeling of her father's hands on her. But Travis learned to hold her through them, to whisper reassurances until she remembered where she was, who she was with, that she was safe. He never showed impatience with her fears, never made her feel weak for the things that scared her, just loved her through them with steadfast devotion. And gradually, month by month, Zelda began to heal in ways she had not thought possible. The constant tension in her shoulders eased. The hypervigilance that had marked her every waking moment softened. She learned to accept affection without flinching, learned to trust that raised voices did not automatically mean danger, learned that she could disagree with Travis without fear of reprisal. "You are getting better," Travis told her one night as they lay in bed, her head pillowed on his chest and his fingers running through her unbound hair. "Stronger, more yourself. I had a good teacher." She pressed a kiss to his collarbone. "Thank you for being patient with me." "You never have to thank me for loving you, Zelda. That is not a burden, that is a privilege." He tilted her chin up so he could see her face in the moonlight filtering through their window. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Do you know that? I am beginning to believe it." And she was, more and more with each passing day. The seasons turned and turned again, bringing changes and growth. Zelda kept her shop but scaled back her hours, focusing on custom work that challenged her skills. Travis was promoted to sheriff, taking on more responsibility and a modest increase in pay. They saved carefully, planning for a future that stretched ahead of them like a ribbon. It was late summer when Zelda realized she was pregnant, her monthly courses missing, and a persistent queasiness confirming what her body had been trying to tell her. She waited until she was certain, until Dr. Morrison had examined her and declared her healthy and expecting, before telling Travis. She planned it carefully, making his favorite supper and setting the table with their best dishes. When he came home that evening, dusty and tired from a long day dealing with a property dispute, she met him with a kiss and a secret smile. "You look pleased with yourself," Travis said, washing up at the basin by the door. "What has happened? Sit down first. Eat, I will tell you over supper." Zelda served him roast chicken and potatoes, vegetables from their garden, fresh bread she had baked that afternoon. She watched him eat with barely contained excitement, waiting for the right moment. "All right," Travis said finally, setting down his fork. "You are about to burst. Tell me what has you so happy." Zelda took a deep breath, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby, Travis, next spring around March or April." For a long moment he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face crumpled with emotion, tears spilling over as he came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you certain?" His voice was muffled against her hair. "Truly," the doctor confirmed it this afternoon. "I am healthy, the baby seems strong, everything is as it should be." She pulled back to cup his face in her hands, wiping away his tears with her thumbs. "We are going to be parents, Travis. I am going to be a father." He said it like a prayer, like a miracle. "We are going to have a family." Yes, Zelda felt her own tears starting. A real family, one built on love and safety and everything good. They held each other in the kitchen as the food grew cold, crying and laughing and making plans for a future that had once seemed impossible. Travis placed his hand on her still flat stomach with such reverence that Zelda's heart ached with love for this man, who had seen her pain and chosen to help her heal. The pregnancy was challenging, Zelda's small frame struggling with the weight of the growing child. She had bouts of sickness that lasted well into her 5th month, and the doctor prescribed bed rest in her final weeks when her ankles swelled and her energy flagged. But Travis was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her aching back, reading to her during the long hours when she was confined to bed. "I am sorry I am so useless," she said one February afternoon, frustrated with her body's limitations. "You are growing a person inside you," Travis replied, setting aside his book to take her hand. That is the exact opposite of useless. You are doing the most important work in the world. Their son was born on a cold March morning after a labor that lasted 18 hours and left Zelda exhausted and triumphant. Travis had insisted on being present despite the doctor's protests that it was not proper, and had held Zelda's hand through every contraction, every scream, every moment of agony and effort. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and howling, Travis cut the cord with shaking hands and helped the doctor clean and wrap their son before placing him in Zelda's waiting arms. "He is perfect," Zelda whispered, staring at the tiny face with wonder. "Look at him, Travis. We made this." "We made him. You did the hard part." But Travis was crying again, reaching out to touch the baby's small hand with one finger. The infant gripped it instinctively, and Travis made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Hello, little one. I am your father. I am going to love you and protect you every single day of your life." They named him Thomas, after Travis's father, with the middle name James for Zelda's grandfather, whom she had never met but her mother had spoken of fondly. Thomas Brennan was a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from his first day, he owned both their hearts completely. Zelda took to motherhood with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else, learning as she went and accepting help when it was offered. Mrs. Henderson from Travis's old boarding house came by daily in those first weeks, teaching Zelda how to nurse and change diapers and soothe a crying infant. The women of the town, who had always kept Zelda at a respectful distance, welcomed her into their circles now that she was a wife and mother, sharing advice and hand-me-down clothes and casseroles. "I have a community," Zelda told Travis one evening as they watched Thomas sleep in the cradle Travis had built with his own hands. "I never thought I would have that. People who care, who help, who accept me." "You have always been worthy of that," Travis said quietly. "You just needed to believe it yourself." The years that followed were marked by the kind of ordinary happiness Zelda had once thought existed only in stories. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed his father around like a shadow and brought his mother fistfuls of wildflowers. The house rang with laughter and the chaos of family life, with scraped knees and bedtime stories and the million small moments that built a childhood. When Thomas was 3, Zelda became pregnant again, and their daughter Sarah was born the following winter. She had Zelda's blonde hair and Travis's serious dark eyes, and from the beginning showed a stubborn independence that made both parents laugh. Thomas was devoted to his baby sister, showing her his treasures and singing to her when she cried, already practicing the protective instincts his father had modeled. Travis continued his work as sheriff, earning the respect and trust of the community through fair dealing and genuine care for the people he served. He broke up fights and mediated disputes, and occasionally faced real danger when outlaws passed through. But he always came home to his family, always kept his promise to Zelda that he would be careful. And Zelda flourished in ways she had never imagined possible. She became known throughout the territory for her sewing skills, taking commissions from as far away as Denver for wedding dresses and formal wear. She joined the church women's auxiliary, helped organize school fundraisers, became someone others sought out for advice and companionship. The frightened girl who had arrived in Fort Garland alone and broken had become a respected woman with a family and a future. But the past had a way of reaching forward sometimes, casting shadows even into the brightest present. It was a summer afternoon when the letter arrived, addressed to Miss Zelda Coleman in care of the Fort Garland post office. Zelda stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, recognizing the handwriting even after 7 years. Her father had found her. The letter was brief, written in the slurred script that indicated he had been drinking. He said he was sick, that he was dying, that he wanted to see his daughter one more time before he met his maker. He did not apologize for anything he had done, did not acknowledge the pain he had caused, just demanded she come to Kansas City to attend his deathbed. Zelda's hands shook as she read it, the old fear rising up to choke her. Travis found her sitting at the kitchen table with the letter spread before her, her face drained of color and her breathing shallow. "What is it?" He took the letter from her nerveless fingers, read it quickly, and his expression hardened into something dangerous. "He cannot hurt you anymore, Zelda. I will not allow it. He wants me to come." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "He is dying and he wants to see me. You do not owe him anything, not your presence, not your forgiveness, not a single moment of your time." Travis crouched beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "You never have to see him again if you do not want to." Zelda looked at her husband, at the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, and felt some of her panic recede. "I know. I just did not expect this. I thought I was done with him, that this part of my life was over." "It is over if you want it to be." He squeezed her hands. "Or if you need to see him to find closure, to say the things you never got to say, then I will go with you. But it is your choice, Zelda. Nobody else's." She thought about it for 3 days, turning the question over in her mind from every angle. Part of her wanted to ignore the letter, to let him die alone as he deserved. But another part, the part that had worked so hard to heal, wondered if seeing him one last time might help her finally lay the ghosts to rest. "I want to go," she told Travis finally. "Not for him. For me. I need to see that he cannot hurt me anymore, that I am stronger than my fear of him." Travis did not argue, just made arrangements for Mrs. Henderson to watch the children and bought train tickets to Kansas City. They traveled together in late August, the journey taking 3 days by rail, and Zelda was grateful for every moment that Travis's solid presence kept her anchored. Her father was in a charity hospital, dying of liver failure brought on by decades of drinking. He had aged terribly, his face gaunt and yellow, his body wasted to nothing beneath the thin blanket. When Zelda walked into his room with Travis at her side, he did not recognize her at first. "Papa," she said, and watched his eyes focus with difficulty. "Zelda." His voice was a whisper, barely audible. "You came." "I did." She stayed by the door, Travis's hand firm on her lower back. "You said you wanted to see me. I am dying." He said it like it should mean something to her, like it should inspire pity or forgiveness. "I know." Zelda found her voice steady, stronger than she had expected. "The doctors told us you have maybe a week left. I wanted to see you, my daughter, before I go." He coughed, a wet rattling sound. "Wanted you to know I am sorry." The words should have meant something, should have sparked some feeling, but Zelda felt only emptiness. "No, you are not. You are scared of dying alone, of facing whatever comes next with the weight of your sins on your soul. But you are not sorry for what you did to me. I did my best." The old defensiveness crept into his tone. "Raised you on my own after your mother died, fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head. You beat me." Zelda took a step closer, feeling Travis move with her. "You terrorized me. You made me wish I was dead more times than I can count. And then you were going to do worse, things I will not speak aloud, before I ran away to save myself. I never did anything improper." But his eyes slid away from hers, guilty. "Only because I left before you could." Zelda felt a weight lifting from her chest with every word. "I came here to tell you that I survived despite you, that I built a good life with a man who loves me, who treats me with respect and kindness, that I have children who will never know the kind of fear you taught me. You do not get to ask for my forgiveness, Papa. You do not get to die thinking you were a good father who did his best. You were a monster, and I hope you carry the knowledge of that into whatever comes next." Her father stared at her, something like shock in his rheumy eyes. "You cannot talk to me like that. I am your father. You stopped being my father the first time you raised your hand to me." Zelda turned toward the door, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Goodbye. I hope your death is easier than the life you gave me, but I no longer care either way." She walked out without looking back, Travis beside her, and did not cry until they were back at their hotel room. But these tears were different from the ones she had shed before, cleansing rather than bitter, releasing the last of the poison her father had left inside her. "You were magnificent," Travis told her, holding her close. "So strong, so brave. I am in awe of you, Zelda Brennan." "I am free," she whispered against his chest. "For the first time I am truly free of him." They received word 2 days later that her father had passed in the night. Zelda did not attend the burial, did not mark his passing with any ceremony. Instead, she and Travis took a walk through the city, holding hands and talking about their children, their home, their future. They boarded the train back to Colorado with light hearts, leaving the past behind them where it belonged. Fort Garland welcomed them home with open arms, and Zelda gathered her children close and breathed in the scent of her house and felt peace settle into her bones. She had faced her demon and emerged victorious, had reclaimed the parts of herself she had thought lost forever. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing changes and challenges and joys. Thomas grew tall and strong, showing early signs of his father's quiet leadership and his mother's artistic eye. Sarah was bright and bold, unafraid to speak her mind and fiercely protective of those she loved. When Thomas was 8 and Sarah 5, Zelda gave birth to twin boys, Matthew and Marcus, who filled their house with chaos and doubled laughter. Travis was appointed territorial marshal, a position of honor that came with travel, but also allowed him to make real changes in how justice was administered across Colorado. He advocated for fairer treatment of settlers and natives alike, worked to root out corruption, and earned a reputation as a man who could not be bought or intimidated. And Zelda became a pillar of the community, known as much for her kindness as for her skill with a needle. She took in young women who arrived in town alone and afraid, gave them work and guidance, and showed them that they could build lives for themselves. She never told them why she understood their fear, but they knew somehow, recognized a fellow survivor, and drew strength from her example. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Travis took Zelda back to the bench behind what had been her shop, now owned by one of the young women she had trained. They sat watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, their hands intertwined. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" Travis asked. "When you told me about your father, when you were so afraid to trust me." "I remember." Zelda leaned against him, comfortable in a way she had never imagined possible all those years ago. "I remember thinking you would run once you knew the truth about me, that nobody could love someone so broken. I told you then that you were not broken." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you believe me now?" Zelda thought about her life, about the family sleeping safely in their home, about the friends and community she had built, about the woman she had become. "I believe that even broken things can be mended if they find the right hands to hold them while they heal. You gave me that, Travis. You saw past the fear and the trauma to the person I could become. You did the work yourself," he said quietly. "I just made sure you knew you were not alone. That made all the difference." She turned to kiss him properly, pouring 15 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. "Thank you for looking, for seeing, for understanding." "Always," Travis promised against her lips, "for all the days I have left." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, talking quietly about their children and their plans and the 1,000 ordinary miracles that made up a life. And Zelda felt the truth of her healing in her bones, felt the weight of her trauma lift and disperse like morning mist under the rising sun. She had been invisible for so long, hidden in plain sight, carrying wounds nobody could see. But Travis had looked with more than his eyes, had seen with his heart, and in seeing her truly had helped her learn to see herself. The scared girl who had fled her father's house had become a woman of strength and grace, a mother and wife and friend and mentor, someone who mattered and was loved. The trauma would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had written new chapters, had filled her life with light and love and purpose. And she had learned the most important truth of all, that surviving was not enough, that healing was possible, that broken people could become whole again if they had the courage to try, and someone willing to walk beside them in the darkness. Years later, when Zelda was an old woman with silver in her hair and grandchildren playing at her feet, she would tell her story to those who needed to hear it. She would speak of trauma and healing, of the man who had seen her when she thought herself invisible, of the love that had taught her to trust again. And young women would listen with tears in their eyes and hope in their hearts, and know that they too could survive, could heal, could build lives worth living. But on that anniversary evening, with the mountains standing eternal guard and her husband's hand warm in hers, Zelda simply sat and felt grateful. Grateful for every choice that had led her here, for every moment of courage that had carried her through, for the man who had looked and seen and understood when nobody else had bothered to try. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "I love you," Travis replied, as he had every day for 15 years and would every day for the rest of their lives together. And under the vast Colorado sky, surrounded by the life they had built from the ashes of trauma and fear, Zelda Brennan was finally, truly, completely home.